She was 17 with grease on her fingers and stars in her lungs. She lived in Outpost Theta 9, which was barely more than a scrapyard and a dome, and some stubborn families clinging to the edge of space. Her name was Elsie, and she had a habit of making broken things work again. Old drones, defunct satellites, power cores with burnt fuses. She fixed them all. And then she started tinkering with signals, not to spy, not to steal, just to learn. She cracked open a dead comm relay just to see if she could wake it up, and it blinked to life and pinged a Virelian patrol ship that had no business near a neutral zone. She reported it like she was supposed to through the standard relay, using her real name, because she thought that was what you did when you did the right thing. 3 days later, the sky cracked open, and a Virelian cruiser descended. No warning, no questions, no trial, just boots on the ground, soldiers in black glass armor dragging her from her bunk. Before sunrise, she fought back with a wrench, with her fists, with every ounce of fear that hadn't turned to rage yet, but they were too many, too fast, too ready. She was cuffed in cold steel and thrown into a cell with a camera blinking red in the corner. The trial was scheduled for noon local time, broadcast to the colony, and beyond. She was given a defense drone with a fried core and no voice module. Her charge was treason. Her defense was silence. Her sentence was death. The Virelians called it justice. The people of Theta 9 called it murder. And across the stars, one by one, the humans who saw the footage began to stand. The moment her body hit the platform, something cracked across the system. Not a sound, not a tremor, but a feeling that settled in the bones of every human who saw it. Her parents were in the crowd, held back by shock batons. Her brother was watching from the dome roof, fists clenched so tight his nails dug through his own skin. The camera drone lingered on her face for a heartbeat longer than protocol allowed, as if it too knew this was not just another execution. This was a mistake, the kind you can never walk back. On Earth, the feed hit newsrooms, research stations, city squares, and orbiting habitats at the exact same second. The timestamp burned into the screen, the name of the colony blinking underneath it, the words executed for treason in 3 languages across the bottom corner, and yet all anyone could see was her face looking into the lens, like she was looking straight at them and daring them to do something about it. In orbit above Theta 9, the Virelian cruiser powered up weapons again, not because there was resistance, but because they were trained to expect it and trained to crush it before it spread. They broadcast a warning to the population: compliance ensures survival, non-compliance will be met with absolute force. The broadcast was received and recorded, but no one in the colony moved, no one ran, no one bowed. They just stood there silent like statues, holding on to the last image of the girl who had given them a reason to remember what they were. Across the stars, in war rooms and bunkers and quiet government halls, people watched the replay and did not speak. They only stared. And in that silence, something old and human began to wake. The footage spread faster than light, carried on trade networks, pirate feeds, diplomatic lines. Even old refugee beacon systems that hadn't spoken to Earth in decades lit up with the image of a girl dying, with fire in her eyes and silence in her throat. Elsie became more than a name, more than a girl, more than another lost voice in the void. She became a signal, and every human who saw her felt it deep, a thrum in the spine, a heat behind the ribs, a scream with nowhere to go. Earth's major networks blacked out regular broadcasts to loop the footage, not by order, but by choice. Even the anchors could not look away. Politicians paused sessions, military strategists went quiet, engineers, miners, students, soldiers, prisoners, everyone watched that one moment again and again and again until it was no longer a broadcast. It was a memory burned into collective vision. Veterans from the old Centauri sieges stood up from hospital beds and said it was time again. Young officers stared at the timestamp and noted the delay from feed to Sol. It had taken 4 minutes for the light to reach them, and 6 more before someone at Sol Defense Command opened the vault marked for emergencies only. Black Sky Protocol had never been activated, not even when Earth itself was threatened, but the instant the footage hit the right desk, it was unlocked by a single retinal scan. No speech, no vote, no debate, just a nod and a code typed in by a shaking hand. By the 9th minute after the execution, every dreadnought, carrier, destroyer, and Sleeper Fleet, hidden across the void, began to wake their systems humming to life, their AI cores sensing to a single objective. They did not raise flags, they raised weapons. They moved in silence because there was no need for words. The fleets activated in deep voids far beyond colonized space, near dead stars, under the crust of moons carved into launch silos. The weapons had been sleeping like giants, but now they woke. And they were angry, black steel and fusion hearts guided by minds, designed for precision and speed and destruction. They sensed across light years, not with chatter but with code, and once the signal was received, each vessel knew exactly what it was supposed to do. The first to move were the phantom ships' black hulls, no transponders, heat signatures buried beneath cryo shields. They slipped into FTL, like whispers in the dark, heading straight for Virelian deep space, not to scout, not to warn, but to mark targets and disrupt relays, and clear a path for the wave that followed, because Earth did not intend to speak first, it intended to strike. By the 23rd minute, Sol Defense had already decrypted old Virelian star maps and pulled updated scans from merchant channels. The fleet paths were plotted through the quiet zones, the zones the Virelians thought too remote to watch, too vast to cover. The ones they had always used to move unnoticed. Those corridors had now become blades in the dark, and humanity had learned how to aim them. In the command room at Lagrange 0, Admiral Reza stood without speaking as the countdown ticked across the master display. The room was filled with officers and specialists and techs, but no one spoke, not because of protocol, but because they had all seen the footage, and they all knew that what they were about to do was not about politics or power. It was about the look in that girl's eyes, and what it meant to everyone who still believed in the line between right and wrong. At 26 minutes, the first jump signatures were confirmed by Virelian border beacons, and the Empire sent out standard alerts. Another minor incursion. They thought another flare-up from some stubborn frontier militia. They were not prepared for what was coming, because they had never fought humans who had nothing left to lose, and a reason to burn everything down. The Virelians saw the first wave appear on long-range scanners, and did not flinch. Their empire had crushed rebellions before, had silenced uprisings on 100 worlds, had reduced resistance to ash and history, and they thought this was the same, a flash in the pan, an angry species venting grief before the leash was pulled, and they were reminded who ruled this part of the stars. But the data did not match the pattern, because this fleet was not scattered, not disorganized, not improvised. It was coordinated and clean and terrifying in its silence. The human dreadnoughts came in without hails or broadcasts. They did not posture or threaten. They opened fire before local systems could even charge their defense grids. The first target was a Virelian garrison moon, armed to the teeth, surrounded by satellites and frigate patrols, designed to detect any breach within 10 light seconds, but none of that mattered because the first kinetic rods hit at orbital velocity, and the moon cracked along its fault lines in 3 places before the alarms even finished sounding. The Virelian admiral in charge tried to issue a response order, but the comms were jammed not by brute force, but by elegant, precise pulses that hijacked their own relay frequencies and played back the sound of Elsie's last words, looped over and over again in a dozen languages, her voice calm, steady, defiant, as the human ships cut through squadrons like blades through mist. The second target was the relay station at Nearest Point, critical to Virelian communications across 5 sectors. It was erased by a single salvo from the long-range guns of a carrier-class warship painted black and unmarked, but with the word Elsie etched into its prow in raw steel. When the station went dark, entire fleets were blinded, and the Empire staggered for the first time in living memory. They scrambled ships, they issued protocols, they tried to form a wall, but they did not understand they were fighting ghosts and fire and memory, and every minute they spent trying to understand was another minute humanity pushed forward without hesitation, without fear, without mercy. By the 31st minute, the Virelians were no longer in control of their own borders. Their fleets were in disarray. Their deep space relays were being hijacked. Every time they tried to counterattack, they found themselves facing the wrong target at the wrong angle. Their defensive lines crumbled under wave after wave of human ships, and they had no idea how it had happened, how a species they had always dismissed had learned to move so fast, so precisely, so unforgivingly. Admiral Vrak, who had once been the terror of frontier worlds, sat at his command table staring at the display in disbelief. His empire was built on intimidation and iron will, but now that will was bending under the pressure of something human, something pure and savage. It was no longer a war, this was a purge, and they were the ones being hunted. The first of their capital ships was taken down by a surprise attack from a stealth destroyer that had been hiding behind a nearby asteroid. The human vessel didn't announce its arrival, didn't issue any warning. It simply tore through the Virelian hull with a direct hit to the reactor core. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves across the sector, and the Virelians didn't even have time to react before their own fleet turned on them, scrambling for cover as the humans kept coming. The humans didn't need a reason to fight anymore. They didn't need a declaration of war. They didn't need a treaty. They only needed to remember the face of one girl, and every Virelian ship that fell was a tribute to that memory, a reminder that the Empire had been too careless, too arrogant to understand the kind of fury they had awoken. Back on Earth, no one spoke of victory, yet no one celebrated. It was not a time for cheers or speeches. It was a time for action, and every fleet admiral, every commander knew that the work wasn't done, not until the last Virelian had been driven to their knees, not until the Empire was nothing more than ash. But that day was coming, and it was coming fast. By the 35th minute, the Virelians were starting to feel the weight of their own arrogance, the kind of arrogance that only comes from ruling an empire for centuries, believing that nothing and no one could challenge them, believing their power was absolute now. They were scrambling, they were retreating. They were losing everything they had built in less than an hour, and the worst part was they couldn't even understand how it had happened. Their fleet was disintegrating in front of them, entire battle groups torn apart by surprise attacks and coordinated strikes that they had no defense against. It was as if the humans knew their every move before they made it, like they were reading their thoughts. They couldn't track them. They couldn't anticipate them because the humans were everywhere at once and nowhere at all. Their tactics were fluid, unpredictable, and brutal. Each wave was followed by another, and there was no space for the Virelians to breathe, no time to regroup. The Virelian High Command tried to issue orders, but their communication systems had been compromised. They couldn't get through to their fleets. Their commanders were isolated, cut off from one another, and from their own supply lines. Entire systems were going dark. Their ships were lost in deep space, no longer able to coordinate their efforts. Their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness, the sheer size of their empire now a hindrance rather than a weapon. Admiral Vrak ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The humans were already there, cutting them off in every direction. They couldn't escape the web that had been spun around them. Their last remaining fleets were scattered in all directions, trying to outrun the inevitable, but the humans were faster, and they were relentless. And then came the transmission. It was a single message broadcast on every frequency across the Virelian Empire. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a demand, it wasn't even a declaration of war. It was simply the footage of Elsie's final moments, her eyes staring into the camera as she died, and the message that came with it was simple and clear. You are finished. The Empire had not seen its end coming, but humanity had. By the 42nd minute, the Virelians were no longer pretending to fight back. Their flagship, the Valiant's Wrath, had taken a direct hit from a human railgun, and its hull was splitting apart under the force of the impact. Its reactors were unstable, and its crew was abandoning ship in panic. But there was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide, and no reinforcements to call in. Admiral Vrak sat in his command chair in the center of the chaos, but he no longer had any orders to give. The command center was dark, except for the emergency lights and the flashing screens reporting system failures and incoming fire. The ship was dying, but it wasn't just the ship, it was the whole empire crumbling around him, and he knew it. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape from the wrath that was coming for them. The humans didn't need to talk, they didn't need to negotiate, they didn't even need to chase anymore. Their ships hovered at the edge of the battle like a storm waiting for the right moment to strike. They didn't have to rush, they knew they had already won. In the command room at Lagrange 0, Admiral Reza stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the destruction unfold on the holo display. He didn't look away, his gaze never left the flashing lights, the falling ships, the dying empire. because he knew what it meant to be here, what it meant to have crossed the line, and now the cost of that crossing was being paid in full. The humans hadn't come for war, they hadn't come for conquest, they had come to erase an empire for the murder of one girl, and now the entire Virelian fleet was falling apart under the weight of that vengeance. Across the galaxy, the rest of the Virelian territories began to crumble. Two systems fell silent, planetary shields failed, stations went dark, rebellion spread like wildfire on worlds that had never dared to resist before, as if the very people they had subjugated had found their strength again, and with it the will to rise. And in that moment the Virelian Empire knew they were nothing more than dust scattered on the wind. By the 50th minute, the Virelian Empire was no more. The last of their ships were either destroyed or fleeing into deep space. No command structure remained. Their systems were in chaos. Every sector a burning ruin. Their colonies were abandoned, their people scattered as the rebellion spread to every corner of their domain. They had tried to hold on to the illusion of control, but it shattered in the face of humanity's rage and resolve. The flagship Valiant's Wrath exploded in a massive fireball as its core went critical, a fitting end for the ship that had symbolized the Virelian Empire's arrogance. And now there was nothing left but the aftermath, the silence and the void that followed the last blast of fire and debris as the final remnants of their fleet drifted helplessly through space. On Earth, no one celebrated, no one cheered. There was no victory parade, no speeches of triumph. There was only the cold satisfaction of knowing they had done what was necessary. They had answered the call of a single girl who had become a symbol of something much bigger than herself. Elsie's face was still everywhere, every screen, every wall, every face across Earth. And the colony, she had become the spark that had set the fire of rebellion ablaze, and now humanity stood as one in the ashes of the empire that had fallen beneath their feet. There were no more Virelians to fight, no more orders to follow, no more strategies to plan. The humans had given everything for this moment, and they had taken it in the span of less than an hour. They had burned the empire that thought itself invincible. They had made sure that no one would ever forget the price of underestimating humanity. And across the stars, as the last of the Virelian warships disappeared into the blackness, the humans stood tall in their victory, for Elsie, for justice, for the one girl who had dared to face an empire and burn it down with nothing but her defiance.